Hi there, and welcome to Art of Procurement episode 256 with me, Philip Eidson, and thank you so much, as ever, for tuning in this week. Before I introduce you to today's guest, I actually teased last week about an upcoming launch of a product that we've called AOP Mastermind. So for decades, the only way for procurement professionals to engage with their peers outside of their organization and do that in really meaningful ways has been through in-person events and training. And for all the impact that these events can have, and they do have a significant impact for those who can afford to go to the events, the budgetary and time constraints associated with them limit the opportunity that most can get out of such activities. So we sought to build a completely new way for procurement professionals to collaborate, to network, to benchmark, and to learn, and to do that from anywhere in the world without the barriers of travel time and expenses. And so that's what AOP Mastermind is. It's the only procurement community that's created exclusively to deliver an in-person experience, and that's really important, the fact that we've built so many ways for you to communicate, collaborate, network, benchmark, and learn in an in-person experience, but also delivered through a virtual environment. So whether you want to shape the future of procurement, learn the actions that you need to take to become a trusted advisor, or understand the latest market trends for your category, then AOP Mastermind has been built for you. We have a big reveal for Mastermind. It's going to be next week if you're listening to this show the week that it was published. It's going to be on June the 18th, 2019. So we've scheduled 4 launch events that day. So no matter where you are in the world, there should be a launch webinar that works for your calendar, or certainly that fits in with your time zones. So to join one of our launch event webinars and be the first to see Mastermind, you can register at artofprocurement.com/launch event. That's artofprocurement.com/launch event. We're really excited to share with you the details of Mastermind and pull back the curtains. So I can't wait to see you in one of our launch webinars. Okay, let's go into today's show. If you've been in the workplace for really any period of time at all, the chances are good that you've experienced poor management at least once throughout your career. Why is that? Why are great managers often so rare? And how can you ensure that you are being the best people manager that you can be for your team? Well, my guest today is David Deacon. David is a career HR executive, and he's had roles such as Chief Talent Officer for MasterCard, Head of Talent for Capita, and Head of Leadership Institute at Credit Suisse. David is also the author of The Self-Determined Manager, a manifesto for exceptional people managers. And so in the podcast today, David addresses all the highs and the lows, the whys and the why nots of people management. Well, today is actually one of 2 podcasts that I have coming up on the topic of people management. Today explores the topic with David from a broader talent management perspective. Then next month we have one that discusses more specifically in terms of managing procurement teams. So let's go into the interview. I started off the conversation just by asking David if he could share a little bit more about his background.
I'm really a human resources person. That's what I've done for my entire career, and most recently that's been in the talent space. Mm-hmm. So talent development, talent management, talent acquisition, those kinds of things. Before that, I did a bunch of roles, some of which were sort of generalist HR roles. And I've been enormously lucky, Philip. I've lived and worked in the US. I've lived and worked twice, actually. I've lived and worked in the UK, where I'm from. I've lived and worked in Asia. Yeah, had a time in Hong Kong, and so that's been fantastic. Really lucky to have done that, and throughout my entire career, regardless of where I've been working, what I've been doing, I've always been fascinated by what the managers around me are doing. Mm-hmm. And many years ago, that provoked a point of view about what good management looked like that I couldn't find anywhere else, and that was where the book started. So that's how an HR person ended up writing a book, which we don't all do.
The book you wrote is called The Self-Determined Manager. I wonder if you could share just a little bit about the background of how that came to be and why a self-determined manager.
I started writing this book, like I say, many years ago, really out of frustration, not at how I was being managed, but how I saw other people managing people.
Yeah.
And that kind of sense of it was really, it was generally managing other people was then and continues to this day to be fairly poorly done. And if you were lucky, you'd worked for a good manager.
Yeah.
And you'd kind of you'd somehow intuited from how they behaved how to do it well. But other than that, most of the training, most of the guidance tends to be sort of technical. It's to do with either the techniques of getting someone to do something, so delegation, or how to make people more productive, or running processes.
Yeah.
The performance management process, or the disciplinary process, or the absence management process, or whatever it is. So you learn the kind of control and process aspects of being a manager. That's almost the sort of minimum standard. But most people haven't learned actually how to be good managers. They've just learned up those technical skills, and so as a result. Yes, and this is hugely impactful, important role, which most people don't do very well. And I guess my other observation was not only do most people not know how to do it, but most people actually want to be quite good at it. Most of the poor managers aren't deliberately poor.
Right.
They just don't know what good looks like, and they don't know how to be it. So the book was kind of a reaction to that, and I started writing it, and then got the opportunity to go to Hong Kong, the first of those international trips, and the manuscript mistakenly got put into store.
Okay.
And so I didn't have access to it for a couple of years, and by the time I got back to it, kids were older and more demanding of my time, and it was then many years before I got the opportunity again to focus a bit on writing. Writing is a discipline. It's not particularly easy, and you have to devote time and effort. And so it's been probably 30 years in the making.
Interesting.
And the book is a whole new manuscript. It's not the thing I wrote first. But the title, this notion of being self-determined, which is channeling, making up your own mind, and making your own decisions and seeing things clearly for yourself. That's been pretty consistent, and that was sort of this reaction to the best managers aren't doing what they're told to do. The best managers are doing what they know is right for the people and for the team and for the outcomes that they're after. So there's a whole, and the book starts obviously with lots of stuff about self-determined means being kind of clear about your own drive and purpose and sense of mission and strengths and weaknesses before ever you can think about how to get the best out of people and how to build momentum for your team. It's sort of a necessary starting place. You can't be a good manager without that sense of self. So it sort of tries to tie all of that up.
Yeah. If I could ask then about that sense of self, like how can we as managers, are there tips that you would give in terms of how to go about that self-reflection and self-assessment, what we're good at, what are our shortfalls? Because I think it's something that is very difficult for all of us to do. I think because sometimes we might not want to know what we hear is part of it, but also like, where do you start? I'd love if you could share a little bit of insight for our listeners on how to go about doing that.
Yeah. And that's really hard because in addition to the challenges that you rightly have raised, it's relatively unusual. If you ask someone who works for you, if you're lucky enough to manage other people, and you ask one of those people, what am I doing well, and where do I need to improve? They're in a really difficult spot.
Yeah.
Even if they have an answer, and the chances are they might not, but if they do have an answer, and it feels in some way critical of you, they're going to be pretty wary about telling you,
right?
Because they know that you have power,
yeah,
because you're their manager. So yeah, it's very hard, and so one piece of this is about being conscious, which sounds ridiculous, but most managers are accidental.
Mm-hmm.
And what they haven't recognized is that what they do is magnified and amplified by the team. And they don't recognize that their mood sets the mood for everyone else.
Yeah.
And they haven't appreciated that the way that they behave is the example for how everyone else will behave. The things that they prioritize become the things that are important for the entire team. So managers have this extraordinary power over how the team operates simply by virtue of being in the job.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't switch that off. And you can't kind of go, I'm a bit weary today, so I'm not going to bother worrying about being a role model or setting the tone, because you're setting the tone anyway. You don't get a choice. So given that, the starting place is to consciously choose what kind of tone to set. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So to get pretty aware about the things that you do that create that culture for your team, and choose the culture. So one of the starting points is sit down and think about, what environment do I want my team to operate in, and how will the way that I behave promote that environment?
Mm-hmm.
And the other side, what is it that I might do that might undermine it? Because that's your opportunity. That's the power that you have by virtue of having that manager role. So a lot of it is this getting thoughtful, getting conscious about the environment that you set and the impact that you have on the team. And as you start to get clear in your mind of, I want a team that I lead to be like this.
Yeah.
So maybe you want it to be positive, ambitious, and high performing. It sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
What are the things that you, as the person who's responsible for that culture, what are you doing to help them be positive and high performing?
Right.
And what are you doing? So when you get critical and negative and grumpy, guess what? You're undermining those two things.
Mm-hmm.
When you're calling out people for doing things well, when you're celebrating successes, when you're being encouraging, when you're catching people doing something right, to borrow from the 1 minute manager, then you're doing things that set the tone. But you have to choose what tone you want, and sometimes that needs to be really client focused. Sometimes that needs to be defensive when things are going badly wrong.
Yeah.
There's not a single answer. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But you're the manager. You get to choose.
Now, how? And this is something I struggled with when I was a first-time manager, because I think you're right. A lot of us, when you become a manager for the first time, it is accidental. It's often based on your success as an individual contributor. And it's usually within the same organization of which you were an individual contributor. I think there's a tendency to either go into that management role and want to be friends with everybody, or want to create so much distance between everybody. And it's obviously neither of them are necessarily healthy. I wonder if you could share if there's any tips you give to new managers on how to kind of strike the balance between obviously being in that position now where you are setting the direction and not wanting either to be too aloof on one side or too friendly on the other side with the team.
Yeah, and a piece of that is you need to be aloof, which I think is the hardest thing for people because they want to still be part of the team, and they want people to feel like you're just one of them, and
you're one of the friends. Everyone's friends,
sociable. And, and you cannot be. It's just not. That's not what being a manager is about. As a manager, you are responsible for the output of the team and the growth and success of the individuals, and there's nothing in either of those two objectives that means it's a good idea to try to be the friends.
Mm-hmm.
It never works. You will have to make choices about what's right for people, about what's right in terms of performance, about the future direction. You're not going to be able to please everyone, and you can't ever have a situation where people think that you have favorites or think that you have confidants, or if you start setting up those kinds of relationships or maintaining those kinds of relationships, all kinds of bad things happen because people start playing games inside the team. So you have to let it go. You have to accept that if you want to have the responsibility as a manager, then it's a responsibility, and you can't be friends. And if in doubt, on the side of being detached.
Yeah, create distance.
That's what you need to do.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it kind of segues into that when I know you've done a lot of work, and you obviously through the course of your experience, seen the attitudes and the approaches that the most effective managers carry. I just wonder if you could share what some of those look like. What do the best managers do best?
I think the best managers, they're doing two things sort of simultaneously. I guess they're doing three things simultaneously. So the first is they're developing this really strong sense of what the team can do and can achieve, and the impact that their effort can have, and the best managers get really, really clear about that, and articulate and in their own way passionate about why this stuff is important and why it can make a difference. And I mentioned in the book an example of a manager who I worked with a while ago. And this was a kind of a back office administrative a processing function. It was not particularly exciting work by any sort of external or objective point of view, but he was so clear that team doing their work really well made a big difference to the experience of the customers that ultimately they served, that he could draw the importance from it, and he then transmitted that importance to his team. So everyone felt that they were engaged in doing something important and impactful. So one piece is about having that sense of purpose and ambition and drive and motivation for the work of the team. So that's one bit. Simultaneously, they are really good with individuals. They've figured out that the best way to manage people is to help each of them be as successful as possible. And I said, I will often say the best managers help people to be more successful than they actually ever realized that they could be.
Yeah.
And if you think about the people that you worked for, who were the best people to work for, if I was to say, Philip, who was your best manager? The person you would select was probably the person who helped you to be more successful than you realized was possible.
Yeah, I agree.
And they've left They've left a legacy for you in a sense of you did great working for that person.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of reasons why you will have done great working for that person. And other people will probably also choose him or her. Their reasons will be slightly different. And that's because great managers vary the way they deal with individuals depending on the needs of the individual. But in all cases, what they're doing is getting the best from that person at the point that they have them. Right? So they're taking what they have and making it better, kind of regardless of the starting point. So they're brilliant with individuals that they get very clear in their own minds on what the person is great at, what they need to focus on, where they could go, where they're heading, what support they need. They encourage them when they need encouraging. They smack them when they need smacking. You know,
they got a really good sense for them as individuals that is working for them.
They really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have an ambition for them. Right? They have at one point in the book I talk about having a plan, and I don't mean a personal development plan in the system, although it could be that. But typically they have. You can ask them, where do they think this person is headed, and they'll tell you, and they know why they believe that that's possible for that person, and their ambition for them will be significant. Right? They will want amazing outcomes for that person, and they'll be pretty clear on how they can help them get there. So the best managers have a plan for everyone.
But it sounds like they want to be vested. They want to be vested.
Nudging people forwards.
Yeah, they want to be vested in the career development of the people that work for them. Like they want to have a role in that, whether it's just encouraging them to the next level or painting a picture of the art of the possible they may not see, as opposed to just looking at them as folks to manage.
Right, and it's not only their career development that they're interested in; it's their success. They're vested in them doing really well now and really well in the future. It's that ambition for how well this person can do, and some people have relatively modest ambitions and relatively modest capabilities. So it's not the best managers aren't trying to make everyone into wannabe CEOs necessarily.
Right.
They're just kind of taking them where they are and accelerating that a bit, giving it a bit of a nudge. So when you add all of that up, of course, what you get is a high performing team, because you've got a bunch of people who are all working to the best of their abilities or slightly beyond. And so then the third thing, so the second thing is they're great with the individuals, and then the third thing is they're hyper alert about the team, and that team dynamic, and that making sure that the team is operating in the right ways, really positively, with a future orientation, always doing the right thing, never playing games, never being toxic. So they're really good at creating that team atmosphere. They're brilliant with the individuals, and they've got this strong sense of ambition and drive and purpose and mission.
Now,
and all of those things together kind of create, I think, some great outcomes for managers.
And what I was going to ask there is about, for example, you talked about culture and making sure that kind of keeping the finger on the pulse that everything is going in the right direction for the team. You know, other red flags that you look for, because it's obviously not necessary. Sometimes it's obvious when things aren't going so well. Oftentimes it's a little less obvious because people are trying to hide things from you as a manager. So I wonder if there's red flags that you look for.
Yeah. There isn't any specific red flag. There's obviously the things, whenever something seems like a little bit of a surprise, seems a bit unusual or unexpected, it usually means something's wrong. So high staff turnover is the obvious thing. And some, you know, one of the other things about good managers is they set very high standards. That they're not interested in having people taking it easy, not doing great work, not having a sense of a sense of wanting to contribute and wanting to do better. So great managers will sometimes get higher staff turnover because people don't like working for them if they have to work hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so even the obvious stuff, like you look for staff turnover, doesn't necessarily mean that things are wrong.
Yeah.
And low staff turnover can be the sign of a team where everything's too comfortable and too cozy and no one's being pushed.
Yeah, everyone's just happy and getting by.
Exactly. So of course, multiple data points are always helpful.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got fairly clear performance or productivity data and you can see changes in that helps. If you've got engagement type data, that helps. I've used in the past a manager survey, which sort of gets over the problem that you were describing earlier about asking, as a manager, asking for feedback from the people that work for you. If the organization has an anonymous feedback mechanism, so at one of the places where I worked, every year we would survey every employee and ask about their experience of being managed by their manager.
Mm-hmm.
And so long as there was a minimum number of responses for each question, the manager then got anonymous feedback and a score and some comments and so on. And it created this brilliant feedback loop so that people could hear in a safer way how they were doing as a manager. But it absolutely emphasized that managing people was a really important thing, and that as a company, we took that so seriously that we asked everyone's opinion every year.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things that you can do, but in general, it's the thing that seems unusual, which is the red flag.
Interesting. So here at Procurement, we're really big believers on the power of your own choices as an individual. And, I can tell that just by the name of the book, it being self-determined, it's about you as an individual kind of taking control of how you operate. And so it's with that context that I asked the question of kind of external support. And what by external, I mean within your organization. When we get into a lot of these roles, we're often unprepared and we're kind of left to our own devices to figure it out. What can an organization be doing to help those? And it doesn't necessarily need to be a first-time manager. It can be somebody who's managing managers for the first time, but someone who's just taking that next step up on the ladder. How can the organization help them be and provide the environment for them to be the best manager that they can be?
It's a great question, Philip, and it's really hard. In general, as in organizations, we tend to invest in terms of training dollars and time. We tend to invest in leaders, so people at the top of the organization or near the top of the organization. Obviously, we invest in technical skills, and we should. That's really important. And some of our organizations have a sense of high potentials, people who they're trying to accelerate through their careers, and they'll often invest in them. Most companies aren't spending much time or money on developing the management skills of their people, and that's a big. I think it's a big gap. I don't know what the solution is because it's companies don't have more money to spend on training, so that's not likely to happen anytime soon. But some focus on helping new managers to understand what the real power and opportunity of the role is, and helping them to develop some of the skills. It's actually been kind of fun. I've been building, just because I think I should, some training modules around the content of the book. And I still haven't quite figured out what it is I'm going to do with that. Mm-hmm. But it's been really interesting thinking about the difference between the kind of management training that I have been involved in delivering in the past, and what this is, which is much more about knowing your own mind, setting your own agenda, finding your own way, and developing some of those kind of fairly simple interpersonal skills that you need in order to help individuals thrive, as well as that sense of your own impact on your team to help that dynamic. And it's sort of applied common sense in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of it really is just about awareness, but it's hard. That there's not much training out there that isn't process or technical or the usual things, having a difficult conversation or a myriad of not very effective coaching models.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had a solution.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting distinction there, because it's one that we actually make in some of the capability development work we do with clients. Is in the procurement space too. We look at technical skills as being important, but that's typically what people are trained on, is how to be a good negotiator, or how to run a really strong process to find a new supplier, or how to be the best, how to mitigate risk through contracting. Technical skills that are important, but what we do less on, again, is the softer skills. And so we look at, a procurement professional, for example, and I think you could apply the same thinking to a manager. Is, you have very different personas, because there's different elements of what you need to do as a manager or as a procurement person. As a procurement person, it would be, part of your persona is to be a technician, because that's where the technical skills from. But part of it is to be a coach. Part of it is to be an architect, where you're looking at creating solutions that compel people to work with you. And a lot of those personas are soft skill based. And they're also skills that transfer from one profession to the other. The only thing that differentiates a procurement professional from a HR professional from a finance professional is just that technical element. So, David, I want to wrap up just by asking a question about differentiating management and leadership, because it's an area where I think, you, as a manager, you are perhaps naturally focused on the day-to-day, but that's not often leading the team in the direction you want to go. And you talked about some of the things that the strongest and most effective managers do is around, creating that purpose. Do you have any advice for managers who might find themselves in the day-to-day to kind of take a step back and think about, how am I leading my group? And how do I create the space for myself to do that, and the space for my team to kind of help them in that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't know if you remember, we used to call first line managers, but supervisors, we used to call them team leaders, because actually that is the job. A manager at every level is essentially leading the team, which means they are getting involved in the day-to-day. Of course it does. But you're right. They're also doing those broader leadership things. And all of our great leaders have learned to be great leaders as they progress through greater and greater responsibility for teams. But they all started once upon a time running a single team, a handful of people, and they built their leadership skills. And so you're never going to be a great leader if you haven't learned to be a great manager. If you don't take that opportunity to understand how to do that well, and practice doing it well and getting it wrong and doing it badly and trying again, and kind of figuring out how to use your unique, authentic self, your own style, your own approach, how to use that in pursuit of great outcomes, successful individuals, fantastic team. Then you're not going to be a great leader if you get to the top, because that's leadership, right? That's getting the most out of your organization is the aggregation of those kinds of management skills. So yeah, absolutely. You must learn how to be a leader by being a manager, and you must focus as a manager on learning that. Otherwise, you will stall prematurely. Your technical skills will take you so far, but to really fulfill your own potential, you need to learn how to do that really well. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. And the interesting thing about leaders and managers is if you ask who was your best leader, who's the best leader you've ever known,
yeah,
you don't hear about people who got involved in the technical detail
right.
of the work. You hear about people who set the tone and created the environment. And so whether you ask about leaders or managers, it's the same thing. The important work, the really important work, is to do with the impact that you have, not to do with the specific work that you do. And so that's what you need to bring yourself back to every time. Every time you find that you're too caught up in the doing things, and you're not stepping back. You don't need a lot of time. You only need a few seconds to ask yourself the question: am I being the manager that I want to be?
Yeah.
Am I creating the team that I need? Am I doing things as well as I could and should? It doesn't take you long to ask yourself those questions, and it'll make you behave differently.
Yeah, that's going back to that self-awareness again, being so critical.
Yeah, so absolutely self-critical, and honestly quite hard on yourself.
Yeah,
it's not easy being a manager. It shouldn't be. You're responsible for other people. It shouldn't be a simple thing. So you have to be a bit hard on yourself. You have to be a bit hard on the people who work for you. Mm-hmm. Great performance and big achievements aren't easily come by, but they're massively satisfying for everyone involved. Yeah. So you push on, you push yourself, and you push them.
Well, David, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. There's well, I would first of all advise anybody who is interested in really elevating their impact as a manager and as a leader to go and check out your book. So that's The Self-Determined Manager, a manifesto for exceptional people managers. David, if people are interested, where can they find out a little bit more? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the plug.
No problem.
So the book's on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Easily available on Amazon. It's about 140 or so pages. So it's deliberately I wrote it to be accessible.
Yeah.
And to be the kind of thing it's got lots of questions like the ones I just asked, and checklists, and lots of stuff that you can refer to. So it's deliberately written to be of use to managers. So yeah, that's on Amazon. And there's a website, www.selfdeterminedmanager.com, if you want to read a little bit more or find out a little bit more about me.
Okay, perfect. Well, what I will do is I will include the links to the book on Amazon, also to your website, and I'll put those in the show notes for today's episode. Those can be found by just going to artofprocurement.com and searching for David Deacon. So that's artofprocurement.com, and all the show notes and the links for the episode will be there. David, one last time, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Hi there. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.